Prophecy for the Last Hour. I'm Liz McGee, and I have a marathon teaching for today. I have been teaching a lot on angels. I've been trying to disseminate some of this information that I've been receiving, through the Ruach, about this whole world, this invisible world that our Bible is constantly talking about. I've come to the conclusion that the invisible is way more real than the visible, which is completely backed up by quantum physics. Now, on my teachings of angels, I have done about 3, and I flip back and forth between the physics of the concept of angels and actual beings that are called angels, like Michael and Gabriel, and we have some actual Hasatan, all right? So, but you have to keep sight of both concepts, because again, this is a fundamental principle, and we are an archetype that, we have a physical body. I've been through a lot of materiality, but we also have the soul, the spirit, these higher programs of consciousness that run in our physical container. And it is the exact same principle for angelic orders or the other, living beings. This is an archetype. So, but one thing I have to say now, I am beginning to really, in my mind, piece together this quote unquote theory of everything. And one of the fundamental things, I believe this wholeheartedly now, that if you're an Ephraimite, if you're a Christian, if you're even a Jew, if you're a seeker of truth and you are trying to get back to a clear, concise understanding of our text, you have to have the philosophical underpinnings, the worldview that our sages, our patriarchs. What it means, let me just say this from the spirit of Elijah, talks about Elijah coming in the last days. Yeah, I believe there'll probably be a dude, Elijah, okay? But fundamentally also, when it talks about that he will turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, what that means is that the children, the elect of the last, will be turned back to in wisdom and understanding and insight and knowledge to our patriarchs, our fathers, from Adam to Abraham to Jacob. These people were the conveyors, the originators. They were the proto-archetypal figures in which Yahweh has implemented his plan for the nations, to go back to their understanding, to get their mind, all right, which is what the mind of Yeshua had. He went and studied. This is the point. So it doesn't have to do with anything with getting, my son to agree with me. This is not what we're talking about. Generationally, parents and children. The fathers are our patriarchs, our sages, the originators of our faith, and we are biblically concerned as the children. So we're going to get on the same page. All right, this is extremely fun. So you need to go back and study deeply into our Hebraic understanding. Now, yes, it's all over the place. I'm sorry, it's in many different texts. It's not exactly the straightest linear line, but as more and more people get the big picture, get the money, and flush it out, it's becoming easier and easier. I didn't really mean to give a little lecture there, but all right. So the power of Elohim, back to the angels, is infinite. Obviously, he's omnipotent, omnipresent. You can't contain him, but he has made a contained cosmos. This is the whole point. But the power of Elohim is infinite, and it is revealed in this world in a limited form, because and I'm just going to read, I cut and paste different things from different people who have flushed this out. Someday when I write my book or put this all down, and I'll give all the footnotes and everybody get credit, whatever. But for argument's sake, let's just try to get the concepts. So it is revealed in this world in a limited form when the light creates vibrations, which is the word of Elohim. I am convinced that, especially in Genesis, our text is talking about a very precise physics of the way in which the cosmos operates. It operates on laws. We would call them physics. There's no problem with that. There are laws in which there is interaction between everything that Elohim has made, and it is quote unquote good. It was good. It started out good, and it's going to go back to being very good. But this, we have to understand, we are talking, a lot of these words really are talking about a physics processes and laws and ways in which things operate. Light, vibrations, sound, energy, matter, these are actually good words that describe this from one, two sides of the same coin, from one side of the coin. The endless pure light of Elohim in its pure sense is a simple light, and it's in a resting state. That's why Sabbath is this concept of it's a day of rest. There's no work needed. The world, everything is in harmony again. Everything just hums along. All right. If there's a perfect static place of rest, everything is just doing what it's supposed to be, humming along for all eternity, and everything is blessed and good, and all the creatures are in just great harmony, and they're all worshiping the creator of this whole cosmos. This is the concept. But when you have energy, you have in it, it's just imbalance. I don't want to get too much in the physics, but this theory is really correct in kind of understanding what's going on. But we have to attribute it. Number one, there's a creator of this. There is an architect. There was a great mind of Yah who instituted all these processes. That's the first thing. But what we understand, especially coming down into angelic ranks and orders, is of limitation, separation, and differences and combinations, and how he creates. The first thing he does, if you understand, he is, that's the first state of it. He is in his resting state, all right? Then he creates, then he forms, then he makes. And we're down here in this, he makes in a physical manifestation. And anyone who is an artist, I understand this process. I have something in my mind. I want to paint something. Like my backdrop here is one of my artwork. I'm a watercolorist. I have to start with quote unquote the blank paper and in my mind. And then I start to execute. I use different tools. When he says he engraves, or I use materials. When he tells us we're made of the dust of the earth, I use paint. I use materials. All these are part of these processes that go into a process of formation until I've actually made something that is outside of me into manifestation, something that is separate from me, but at the same time is a part of me because it came out of me. See, these are all great philosophical, but our philosophy, they knew exactly what they were saying. And these philosophical concepts work for the text. But so but what I want to make, and my point here is, you do have living beings and you do have physics. You have material, you have an end product that's been spit out, so to speak, and you do have processes and programs that were the instrumental processes of making this thing. And this is the whole concept of the tree of life, which is the fundamental. And this I'm telling everyone, and I believe this, and I'm saying this categorically. We need to have a complete Hebraic understanding, because it's Hebraic, it's Abrahamic, and I believe it's totally Enochian, and it goes all the way back to Adam. An understanding of the tree of life and what it represents, because it's a little simple, but inside a symbol, like I've said, a picture tells 1,000 words, is this concept the ancients had of how all these processes in Elohim, and that's why it's plural, people. It's Elohim because Yahweh is a many-faceted Elohim. All right? The same principle. I'm one person, just this one, but I've got a head and I got arms and I got legs. And when I do my painting, it's pretty much between my hands, right? And my head and my eyes. These are relationships. So this is what our prophets are doing, and they are giving relationships in Elohim on how things come into being. It's amazing. So this tree, the 10 Sephirot and the tree of life, is the process that restricts the endless light of Elohim into physical form. And the ancients are, and I say this, Jewish mysticism, this is where the deepest understanding of this, because you don't start teaching this to little 3-year-olds. Oh, let me tell you all about he's going to look, he's like, he just wants to play with his trucks. All right. This is the meat of the word. This is the understanding that has been reserved for us. It is in the Jewish mystical works. And I'm telling you, it's like the Jewish Kabbalah. I don't care if you don't like the word, get used to it. All right. Learn to be able to discern. Greater is the spirit of truth that is in me than the spirit of error that is in the world. That's what 1 John 3 says. So anyways, the 10 Sephirot and the tree of life is the process that restricts the endless light into physical form. This process creates different vibrations that evolves from a creative thought, like I just said, at the top in the mind of Elohim, all the way down in the lowest Sephirot, which is called Malkut, which is the world, the cosmos. And then flip this around. Like I said, 10. Numbers are very specific. Math is another language of Elohim. Many of the Hebrew words, what they do is they encode a lot of truth in the numerical designation of a word. And again, this has a lot to do with the angels. So according to string theory, all of reality exists in exactly 10 dimensions. Where did we hear 10 before? There are 4 related dimensions, the 3 dimensions of space together with the 4th dimension of time, and an additional 6 concealed spatial dimensions. That's exactly what I just said. And this is another, there is always the visible and in the invisible. I have a physical body, you can see me. And you can hear that my mouth is moving, my hands are going like crazy, all right? This is because there is a physical vessel in which I do push out, that is used to push out into manifestation something that is in my mind. So that my words are being pushed out by a whole apparatus. It's the exact same principle that what Elohim is telling us in the 10 Sephirot, the way he pushes out, pushes down, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. That is such a Kabbalistic concept of the Sephirot coming down, pushing out into this endless light into form. All right. So when we get into now we're going to take so this is a theological concept. It's all over our text. That's why Elohim is, I am the Most High Elohim, but he did, in capital E, but he did create, and in part of this process, and because he is a delegator, because there's physics, but there's also living beings. He made angelic orders, all right? And he gave them authority to oversee. This is another part of the concept in our text. There are those who are under him, deputies, chiefs, princes, archangels, artisans, craftsmen. These are words that are all describing different angelic realms and orders that are part of the process. And then and they are, so again, the invisible is always higher order. This is one of it's counterintuitive to us, really, because you can't see it. So it's hard for us to put more strength and authority in something you can't see than something you can see. This is always sort of our problem. As a man thinketh, so is he. It's the thinking that's more powerful than what comes. That's why Yeshua said, for out of the heart are the issues of life. What goes on in the invisible realms is a much more potent and powerful. Yahweh spoke. And there was this is something we need to truly understand. So there is always a huge, and this is when we get into principalities and powers, and there is always the invisible program, so to speak, the man behind the curtain, the system behind the curtain, and then you have the physicality of the essence or being. So the law of physics is ruling the universe is on a fundamental level of reality. It emerges out of a non-material, pre-space, geometric mathematical order of pre-time and space. And if you believe this, you definitely are opening the door to Elohim. And they prove this now. I mean, this is the new, what do they call that? the new architect, there's a word for it. There has to be an architect for the watchmaker. There has to be a clockmaker who made the watch. This is why it says that everyone will be without excuse, because even a child can figure out there's something that made the watch. Watch just didn't poof out of nowhere. All right. So the first thing in beginning to unpack the angels in the highest orders. Now, I did a couple teachings on lists. See, this is my thing. There's so much we can know. I don't know why the church, why are we not teaching people what our texts are talking about? I mean, I love Yeshua HaMashiach. He is my savior, okay? My Messiah. But, he's not the only player in this. And if I want to have a mature understanding, I have to understand the big picture and everyone. And there's so much information. And our sages, the prophets, the writings in the house of Judah have kept this information for us for the last days. So let's go into, I want us to talk about here about, it says one of the first places. Okay, now this is a huge drama. We've been living 6,000 years of recorded human history. Our particular Adamic epoch is in this 7,000 year construct, little blip in the radar from eternity in this little construct. 7,000 years, the typology of the week. Remember I said on the seventh day, you have a back to a place of rest. All the vibration, everything is done. It's going to go back to a resting state, the whole cosmos. The Mazal, this is an ancient concept. This is something we need to begin to understand again. Our ancients had so much more information than we do today. So much has been lost. But what we do have in the flip side, well, I wanted to let me not go off on too many tangents. We may now understand why they started to worship the stars in the days of Enosh. Enosh was one of the pre-Diluvian, it's a verse out of Enoch in Genesis, that they started to worship the stars. But why? What is with all of this worship of the sun, moon, and the stars that we find in ancient worldwide mythologies? All right. So this is where we're going to go. We also understand that they worship the stars. And although the founders of star worship knew about Elohim, because that's what it says, in the days when they called upon the name of God, in that word, and this is a very tricky thing. Let me just say this again, because the word Elohim is an extremely tricky word. Because in the context, you have to understand if we're talking about big E, the Most High, or little e, gods, because it's in our, so this is something. And when you say gods, you really, in the little g, you are talking about some of his living beings who have been given delegated authority. It says that what they knew about Elohim, so they knew about the Most High God, but still they went into a season again, which happened, and we're doing this today, of worshiping the little g's, the Elohims that are in the sun, moon, and stars, Elohims. They mistakenly believe that Elohim is far above the vanities, that is too far above the vanities of this world, and they thought it would be better to serve the underlying stars, who seem to be more of an influencing presence. In time, the underlings became the principal Elohims worshipped, and the notion of monotheism, or of this whole, the creator, the Most High who sits at the top, was lost. This is where we are today and this is why we're falling so rapidly, because we have forgotten, for whatever reasons, that there is a Most High Elohim at the top running the show. And we know from all the text what happens when you forget that very important minor little detail. It is clear that despite the seeming influence of stars upon human life, the concept of a mazal, a constellation, is essentially a physical concept. It is channeled through spiritual forces which flow down to the world. A person can establish direct contact with Elohim through prayer. Okay, bypass the influence of the stars. Now, I think I've used this before. The principle is that Now, in the angelic hierarchies, and there are 10, basically. And there's so many church fathers and the sages and Jewish sages, the prophets have all made these lists. Some will come up with a little different names for them, whatever, but it's biblical. It's in the text. We can know this information. The Maseroth, and this gets into, and I'm going to try to not get so deep that I lose everybody, but we need to understand the principle of the Maseroth, which I mean the zodiac, but that's, that's a profaned, totally off-skewered understanding today. In the ancients, they understood the role of the dimension, the fourth and fifth dimensions, in which were placed the sun, moon, and the stars to rule over, and we're talking about living entities. I've been through this a lot. Living entities that were to rule over and have influence, were given delegated authority to influence the world and its processes and its inhabitants. All right? But this is the point. People like to worship their Elohims physically. This is one of the always, it's very hard, but it's really not hard, people. This is what I mean. If you have, the more I understand, but the more it is, I can, in his pure essence, the more you have the correct theological understanding, the more you just you start to float up in the air. You get it. All right. And you are not bound. Okay. So the Maseroth and a Mazal, these are extremely important principles, but at the highest, in the throne room of Elohim, and this is what a lot of our texts are telling us, the words and the images they use, the Supreme Council, the throne room of Elohim. There's many pictorial depictions of this, like in Revelation, Ezekiel, and Isaiah, and different places, where there is a place, there is a, and this is where, because remember, everything's archetype all the way down. The fact that kings, potentates in the ancient world always had a throne, two thrones, king and queen, very important. We'll go into that, the male and the female, king and queen. And they ruled, they decreed, but they had an entourage around them. The best place for this, I'll tell you, actually, if you read the first chapter of Esther, the way, listen to it audibly almost, and try to picture it in your mind. It is one of the best, actually, encoded, encrypted descriptions of this concept of the throne room of Elohim and all of his deputies and his chiefs and his princes and those who he is highly, his right hand and his left hand deputies, or whatever you want, are there, and all the others, the elders and the living beasts and the living beings, the holy living beings. It's extreme, and you can really picture a very busy king's court. There's a lot of business going on, people coming and going, and decrees are being made, and things are being sent out. I mean, this is not a made-up fairy tale. What I'm trying to tell you, this concept, even though very few people have actually been taken up there, Enoch, Isaiah, a couple of them, to testify, this is a very real concept. So when the Supreme One, or our sovereign, El Shaddai, gave the nations their inheritance, and this is what I would pick up now, and flesh out two concepts within angels, because what we see popping out on the fourth and fifth day is the physicalities, the body parts, so to speak, and this is what Paul alludes to, the celestial flesh of higher processes that are behind them. This is another, you gotta understand, there's always something behind something. So if you see, and that's the concept of the garment, there's always something in the garment. Okay, so when you see, so it's very important. So there's always something behind it, a greater power, greater force, a higher. So, the king puts on certain garments to designate his status, or this is why, again, garments, and we carry this today. This is the whole concept of, in the army, and you got insignias, and certain jackets and certain stripes and certain, lapels, and all different ways of distinguishing people's rank. All right. So the outer garment, the outer is telling you what's inside them, what kind of authority, what they have behind them, backing them up. So getting back to the very important is these 70 angels. This is what I've started to unpack. I have a couple of YouTubes on this, and this is absolute, because I'll tell you what, I am a 100% sick and tired, I'm done, of Hasatan repackaging the ancient world to us, and these whole worlds of the deputies and the chiefs, the Elohim small g, and really what he's projecting to us in all of the media and books and movies and TVs now. Someone was just telling me a new show called American Gods, is the fallen angels, these Nephilim, these X-Men, these these princes who will save mankind because they come out of they come from higher places, and then people in their realize that, oh, they could be what, I mean, the whole thing is just a lie. It's a deception. It's a great deception, and I'm done. All right. So Hassan is trying to lie to you and put his men, so to speak, which are going down. They're going down. We're getting so close to this. But we have to understand that those on the side of Yahweh are much, there's going to be no contest. But anyways, all right, let's stick with this. When the Supreme One gave the nations their inheritance, or really, in these translations, gave the lower deputies, the chiefs, the shepherds, what a lot of words, their inheritance, all right, is similar to the verse that the entire host of heaven, which Hashatam, your element, is appointed to all the peoples. This category is called the hosts of heaven. The sun, the moon, the constellation, the stars, this Mazzaroth that we see physically above us is a whole domain of authority over the earth, under the earth, over everything below it, the sea over us. All right. Now, but the principle is these verses correspond that to every portion below, every earthly nation, there is a quote unquote portion above, a star, a constellation, an Elohim. And this explains the whole pagan world and the other gods and Israel's constant battle between worshiping the Most High Elohim, who Israel was given to him, or as the inheritance, and worshiping the inherited gods of the other nations. Ebenezer, one of the great sages, writes about this verse above in Deuteronomy 4:19. It says, Elohim guides the affairs of the nations with the these other gods, these small Elohims who were put in charge over the nations, with the exception of Israel. That's why Michael's prince is Israel. All right. Through the medium of these heavenly bodies, and the word bodies is what Paul trying to tell you. Now, I'm of the opinion, I don't want to get into, I'm really the opinion that now, so what they show us for the word, that's not really what's out there per se. But that's a whole nother rabbit trail. I'm not even going to go there. With the exception, through the medium of these heavenly bodies. The verse is saying that Elohim appointed the heavenly bodies to the nations, assigning to each nation a different heavenly body through which he governs its affairs. Ibn Ezra is saying that the inheritance that God gives the nations in the passage similarly refers to these heavenly bodies and to their angels. So there's a correspondence between the host of heaven, the 70 nations, the 70 angels that are put over them, these smaller e's, lesser Elohims. And this is how, when it talks about the many Baals, B-A-A-L, the many Baals, all these other gods of the nations, this is what it's talking about. They were worshiping these Elohims that were put over them. The Mazzaroth is, and this, like I said, the zodiacal concept, because these Elohims are located in specific geographic locations. Geography is a very important thing to understand in the text. You can get it. There is geography to the cosmos. And they were put over certain locations, locales, geographic, but dimensions. So the Mazzaroth, okay, and your first breakdown is into four sections, and then you have ending up with 12 zodiacal houses. There's a lot of ways to categorize, subcategorize these concepts, and then you have and then they're given names. They're given beast or animal names, like Taurus and like the crab and the bull, the eagle and the scorpion, these different things. And so it's all, but what we're talking about is this is language that is geographically and etymologically, I believe, in terms, because if an animal is zoology has a name and it has roots, and then it has a certain persona. So I'm seriously, a lion is not a snake. They're very different. And when you start studying out, you see differences, and you're like, oh, okay. And you have to always I can see that, the difference between a lion and a snake, and why the snake, it was Curtin said, he's going to be low to the ground. He's going to slither, where the lion is still going to be able to roar. I mean, these are really important. All right, concepts to retain. In the Mazzaroth, the system of the celestial bodies and their angels with their domain over the various nations is a fundamental element in Elohim's providence or ruling over the nations, and was established at creation. Yet according to, in verse 8, its inception was set according to the number of this, and this is where another thing I've done all this text, this in Deuteronomy, one of the most famous verses for this is in Deuteronomy 8. I don't have that. It'll come Deuteronomy 32:7, where it says, remember the days of old, ask your elders. If this is the point. If you've forgotten this, people, ask your elders, our fathers, our patriarchs. This is where we have to go back to the beginning to figure out the story. You can't make it up. There's so many people today, I'm just done with, who are just still Gentile Christians making stuff up. The only way we're going to get out of Babel and start speaking the same language is we go back and start using the words the way our patriarchs used them. It's in Deuteronomy 32:7. It says that when the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, which means their Elohims, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the peoples according to the number of the sons of Elohim. So in other words, in a zodiacal thing, you have houses, you have divisions, you have categories, subcategories, and under them categories. This is where he appropriated. So in other words, Taurus cannot rule over here, over in Sagittarius. It's not their domain. All right. Everybody was given a mazal, a place of influence. And think of it very straight, you're coming down, a place of influence. The sun shines at over certain geographic parts of the earth at certain times. Now the sun, and this is a good example, is like the highest, this is the concept. The sun is a great image bearer in the sun, that it shines over the whole creation of the earth, right? So it is obviously, its mazal, its influence is over the whole thing. Where if you were a lesser in the category element, you were given a specific geographic location that you could kind of shine down on and influence. There is definitely hierarchy, but be that as it may, and this is my thing that at Sinai, because again, we had the flood, the storyline is you had Adam, it's been a constant war, because day 2, the Hasatan's fall with a third of the angels with him created a lot of disturbance. So there was no more rest in the creation. A lot of disturbance. This angelic order has been like a thorn in the flesh to Ha Elohim, but nothing he can't handle. But he uses it. All things work together for good. The point is that, so we had the flood, we had a whole many incursions of fallen angels constantly trying to derail from the garden. Let me just give the big picture from the garden when Adam and Eve, quote unquote, fell. They were right up there in the throne room of Elohim. Adam was the supreme chief, up at the top in the throne room, under the Father, under the Elohim, given rule and dominion over everything, all the beings that were created. Well, it didn't go well. He fell. He broke one of the most fundamental, and when I unpack it, it is probably one of the most fundamental laws of the cosmos, Adam and Eve, and they fell and they came down into the very, almost like into the very bottom, dense. They lost, I mean, we lost so much, but we are getting back, and we really are through Yeshua, back up top of our game again. But this is, I have to go back to my point. What was I going to make with this? So, because you had the flood, because it got out of, you had a flood. Okay. He had to destroy the world the first time by water. He's going to have to destroy it again the second time by fire. But those are highly apocryphal words. You cannot even assume you understand what fire means. But by the time of Abraham, right after the flood with Nimrod, there was many of the peoples of the earth were right back to where they were before the flood, worshiping these other lesser Elohims. All right. And many of them were influenced again by these fallen watcher angels to do this, because it was known that this would be a major, bring down major curses. I mean, it's a very, but the point is, by the time of Abraham, the point, Elohim started a whole new work in the earth through Abraham. And this work is coming to culmination now. But that is why at Sinai, I've heard the sages teach us. I've read this, and I've always scratched my head. I don't know. Is that really true? But I'm convinced it's absolutely true. It says that at Sinai, all of the Elohim were invited to come and covenant back into relationship. All of the nations could come back and enter into covenant again after the Tower of Babel, get back on track again through Sinai, and they refused. And only Israel, the seed through Abraham, came and covenanted. And I actually think that's really true, because this is part of the thing, that the influence of these fallen to influence, to blind, because they have a lot of power in the first three angelic orders to cloud. This is the whole point of a lot of these words, the blindness to cloud the vision of people from understanding the Most High Elohim. So, all that being said, now I want to go into a little bit quickly here. This is going to have to be a two-parter easily. In Second Ezra, let's just go into again, and I've made this point about how some of these angelic angels, the Eloi Hagoyim, the gods of the nation, small g, are the same thing as I'm talking about as the B'nai Elohim, Ha-Elohim, the sons of God. All right. And I'm going to get back to teaching even again as Yeshua as the Son of God, of Elohim, Ha-Satan as a fallen Elohim, small and how this all works together. But Second Ezra 8:20, it says, O Lord, who inhabits eternity, O Adonai, or Yahweh, who inhabits eternity, whose eyes are exalted, and whose upper chambers are in the air. Allegorical language means he's not a physical being down here. His throne is not down here. Upper chambers in the heavenlies, in a place, and even the word air is not just talking about like the air out here. It's a designation for pure essence. Again, this place of resting, the light, the energy at pure rest. Whose throne is beyond measure and whose glory is beyond comprehension. All right, before whom the hosts of angels stand trembling. This is one of the things you see when you read some of the literature, and it'll talk about they fall down in worship. Nothing, in the presence of Elohim is even the highest ordered chiefs and princes and Elohims are in awe, in reverence, in fear. That's why I can contrast it with Hasatan's arrogant attitude and free will volition to just, all right, we're not going there, but okay, whose word is sure and whose utterances are certain. Okay, he gives decrees. This is the whole point. His word goes forth. He watches over his word to perform it. He said, and it goes all the way down the channel, so to speak. Whose ordinance is strong and whose command is terrible. Whose look dries up the depths, and whose indignation makes the mountains melt away, and whose truth is established forever. Okay, so some of these words, let's go into where this is a concept, all right? And there's many angelic hearts. There are many angels, orders of angels above these quote unquote sons of Elohim. This is another big distinction to understand. There are, when you talk about the four archangels, there are certain, they're chiefs. Delegation, think about it. So we have certain generals when in the war room, the president, he calls his top generals. But under those are tons and tons of sergeants and privates and all people under them. But again, you always have the top of the food chain chief over all the lesser orders. And that's the same principle with Elohim. So in Psalm 104:3, it says, he lays the beams of his upper chambers, which is, again, we're talking about a place, an ethereal place of habitation of our high Elohim. He makes his clouds, well, he in the upper waters. Now we know another thing. There's upper waters, there's lower waters. Who makes the clouds his chariot. I've been through this in a couple of the clouds. That is a word that is used for a rank of Elohim, of angels. Chariots, again, that's a word that is a rank of angels. Who walks on the wings of the wind, those are ranks of angels. These are, you could, if you don't, and he makes his angel spirits, his ministers, a flame of fire. Right there you have so much information on different, there's light, there's there are air, there's fiery angels, there's water angels, there's combinations. This is the thing, there's so much information, but this is the wordage. It's not talking, it's talk. And again, this is our principle, that we're talking about higher processes kind of giving way and more into lower processes, In the Targum of Suda Jonathan, he says in Genesis 1:26, and the Lord said to the angels who ministered before him, who had been created in the second day of the creation of the world, let us make man in our image and our likeness, and let them. Now, I have to say another point at this point. The words us, let us. See, because there's a lot of teachings out there on YouTube that are saying that this us is referring to these lesser Elohims, these other angels. It's not. One of the ways that if you'd study your mystical Kabbalistic understanding, tristes, you would understand when words us, our, she, or he are used in many of the words in their context, it is absolutely referring to the Godhead, to Elohim. So let us is not referring to these other angels that are ministering before him. It is a plural regal noun, and it's talking about Elohim in all of his, everything at his disposal, which is not in terms of him. So if I say, I'm going to make a painting, I'm going to use my hands, it's still me. All right. This is and there's other places it talks about she and he, and so this is, so we're not, I'm just want to make it, let us make man. If you've been hearing that this is lower Elohims that are actually making man, no, that's not what the text is really saying. He might delegate, but in terms of the actual, these processes belong. This gets into a whole thing of what you get out of the tree of life. This is a huge philosophical concept that I will flesh out at another time. 2 Peter 2:4 says, for it is Elohim, if Elohim did not spare the angels who sinned, but threw them down into Tartarus and delivered them to be kept in chains of darkness until judgment. All right. So there's another point to these angels who sinned, these B'nai Elohim, these Hayim, how are they referred to? I'm looking for my other, Hoya of the elves of the Goyim. In Greek mythology, the poet Hesiod said that Tartarus was where the Titans, the first pantheon of Greek Elohims, gods, small g, were imprisoned after the defeat by the Olympian gods. Tartarus was the hellish abode located far below Hades. The origin legends show that Tartarus was used only to confine those who were considered dangerous to the Olympian gods. This is another way of talking about, and see, I believe all the mythology is actually really true in the sense, we just got to learn the language and kind of correct some of the exaggerations thing, but basically, and so the Titans, these are the fallen watcher angels. This is after Genesis 6, that then they were locked up in the abyss. This is a geographic place, and we know this, that Tartarus are places under the earth. Sheol, hell, these are dimensions that are under the earth. And I've even read it from the rabbis in the Zohar that actually these refer to mountains that in Antarctica, and they're deeply imprisoned, and they'd have ice and snow over them. They were locked up to make it as inaccessible as possible. But the tricky thing is, this is how there's so much esoteric understanding. Balaam, it has, and you see this today, those who are really evil and wicked and who want to get that angelic, that fallen angel, watcher angel knowledge will go to great lengths. They will go to Antarctica. All right. This is all begins to make sense when you understand you can have access to them. You got to sell yourself, basically. I mean, how disobedient are you being to Elohim? But this is a piece of the story, and this is what is coming back to us, repackaged in a lot of the stories. How these angels, these being get out. Oh. And they are going to get out because the angel's going to come down with the key. And that's another whole story, I think. But Jude 1:6, again, it says the angels who did not stay within their own position of authority, Genesis 6, left their proper dwelling. He has kept in eternal chains under gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day. And so there you have it again, the confirmation. This is what these prophets are talking about. A real story, a real angelic war going on in the heavenlies, in the lower heavenly realms, and this is truth, but whatever. Now, what Hebrews 2:5 gives you another little piece of the puzzle, and it talks about, for he has not put the world to come, the millennial age, the olam habara, the world to come, of which we speak, in subjection to angels. See, this is how we're going to replace. This is a concept. These 70 angels that were put over the nations and over their geographies and the processes. This is part of the thing. I mean, these angels have influence over the crops and the conditions. They can rule over economies because they can. It gets really deep, but it makes everything make sense. But anyways, it is going to be the elect. It is going to be the elect congregation. It's going to be all Israel. That was the promise given to Israel, that I will put you in charge, basically. In the millennial group, when we go back to a straight vibrational level and everything is at rest again, I will give you their job, basically. All Israel will be the replacements for all of this, these fallen angelic and disobedient orders of angels. That was the whole storyline with Joseph when he saw his mom and dad, Rachel and Jacob and the 12 stars above their head. That's giving them a picture, telling you were going to rule the Mazareth. You were going to be in this position, but you got to do it my way. You got to stay obedient, So even in Plato, from Hippolytus, Plato talks about the same principle and maintains that there's one Elohim over all the rest of the angels and demons. This is angels and demons, good angels, bad angels. We have to, kind of get up to speed on how all these did. And it also says here that Hermes Trismegistus speaks of one Elohim, confesses that he is incomprehensible in his writings and is beyond estimation, but that the spirits that then inhabit or lurk under, behind, or affiliate the fibers of in other words, again, think of a vessel and think of its animation. They animate these things of wood and stone, okay? Because there was, all right, this is all a ploy. But you have two secular, and I've read more and more, they understood this. And this, we have to understand something about the gods of the other nations, is it wasn't like these people were literally like disobeying Elohim. These were their gods. Everything got out of control, and they developed all these pagan practices that were so sinful and evil. I mean, there's so much to this story of what was going on. And then you had Israel, who was trying to, give a portrayal as high priest of how you rule with justice and righteousness. This is what he always said. They had a lot of rituals, a lot of, like I call these object lessons that were, trying to teach the people when I'm giving you this object lesson, this is because of what's going on in the heavenly realms. But they lost it all. I mean, sometimes this is what I mean. We are so people driven by our five senses. It's very hard for us to live in a place of cognitive primacy. Okay. So we have a lot more of these angels, these fallen angels, or these angelic orders that are referred to. Here's another one that in the Legends of the Jews, which is another great book I like to read, and read it, people, it's full of some great information. David, it says that Elohim desired to pass judgment upon the tutelary angels of the heathen before surrendering the heathen themselves to the pious. This is another piece of the story. They're called tutelary angels. I've been through this in a couple teachings. This is where this is where the gods of the nations. This is a lot of what's going on when it talks about how in Daniel, this is all, if you understand, the prince of Greece, the prince of Persia, the prince over Israel. Okay, these are all the chiefs, the generals, the high Elohims that are put over the nations, and they're warring with each other. And part of the problem is these angels, why we can't get rid of war in the world until we get rid of these friggin' angels, because they're constantly being stirred up to war against each other. That's part of I just want to, doing a bigger picture today, we're got to go into more specifics and flush out each of these concepts. But in here, in the Tower of Babel story, it is that the angels, the Lord was revealed to punish them for the work of the city and the tower which these sons of men built under the influence of the watcher angels to try to again gain ascendancy. Behold, the people is one, and one language, all of them. And this they have thought to do, to come against Elohim again. After the judgment of the flood, they were actually pretty hacked off. And they were being incited to riot, to rebel again. And the Lord said to the 70 angels which stood before him, come, and we will descend, and will there commingle their language, that a man shall not understand the speech of his neighbor. And the word of the Lord was revealed against the city, and with him the 70 angels, that has reference to the 70 nations, each having its own language, and thence the writing of its own hand. And he dispersed them from there upon the face of all the earth, and they knew the 70 languages. And one knew not what his neighbor would say, but slew the other, and they ceased from building the city. This is from the Targum of Pseudo-Jonathan, translated by Etheridge of Genesis 11, 5 through 8. But the point is, this is just so much information. I just said Targums are like amplified Bibles. They just give you a lot of information in the verse, so you can, more of the backdrop. Because when they came back from Babylon, the point is, it was a little harder to preach to the choir, so to speak, because the choir had lost so much understanding. So that's why the Targums, because then the rabbis could, or the sages could teach again, and they had to put a lot of more information into the verses. We do this today. So the word of the Lord was revealed against the city, and with him the 70 angels who were given the language. See, each angel has a language. And it's not like French or English. These are, I can't go into almost a vibrational energy and they can form into communicate. Angels have different languages. We know this. Paul talks about, I speak in the tongue of men or of angels, and there's different tongues. This is a whole concept. I can't begin to go to that one. But that's a piece of the puzzle that has to be flushed out and understood. It says again in the Legends of the Jews here, it says, besides the chastisement of sin and sinners by the confounding of speech, another notable circumstance was connected with the descent of Elohim upon earth. It was on this occasion that Elohim and the 70 angels that surround his throne, these are his chief deputies, cast lots concerning the various nations. This is another way of telling this story. But in each telling, you get a little nuance of understanding. Each angel received a nation, and Israel fell to the lot of Elohim. To every nation a peculiar language was assigned, Hebrew being reserved for Israel, the language made use of by Elohim at the beginning of the creation of the world. Now, again, I'm not talking about the Hebrew we use today. These are, when you understand that these are glyphs, These are engravings. These languages have ability to, again, this gets back to this whole concept, abracadabra. This is what people, they have power in words. Speech is so powerful to create, to make, to form. This is all part of the story that we have to get mature. We have to get the meetings. We have to understand what is going on. And now we have been given, because we have the mind of Elohim, we can speak. Our speech should be the language, because we've been authority to use his name. Name is another way of saying the name of his speech, his language. But it's a huge topic. I'm just touching on these things. They built the tower from the book of Jasher. It says they built the tower in the city, and they did this thing daily, many days and years. And at one point, Elohim said to the 70 angels who stood foremost before him, to those who were near to him, saying, come, let us, again, but he is talking again, because us descend and confuse their tongues. There has to be a distinction between Elohim, who is everything and in everything, and his delegated authority. We just tend to lose that very important distinction. That one man should not understand the language of his neighbor, and they did so. And that's in chapter 9, verses 31 to 32 in the book of Jasher. But the point is, you have this kind of the 70 Elohims that rule with Ha Elohim, Adonai Elohim, Yahweh Elohim. They are his delegated authorities. Deuteronomy 32:7 says, remember the days of old, consider the years. Again, in verse 8 says, when the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the peoples according to the number of the sons of Elohim. That's about one of the clear verses we get in our Bible. But the point is, we don't really understand this concept. We always want to say fixing the borders, like down here, we think of borders of nations, which borders of nations are completely arbitrary and have changed throughout the centuries because of all the kingdoms and forever. So you cannot think of these things carnally. You cannot think of themselves. You have to understand, let me put it this way. If you are in the nation still, and your Elohim is not the Most High, sovereign, Yahweh Elohim, you are under the influence, no matter where you go in this world. There is an angel that has been assigned to your tribe, your nation of people, and you're going to be under that influence. I don't care where you go in the world. Conversely, I don't care where I go in the world. My sovereign is Elohim. He knows where I am all the time. I got locked in GPS. I look at Adonai knows where I am all the time. And I can call on his name, and he can give me help whenever or wherever I need it. See, this is such a crazy. So we just got to raise our understanding. All right. So this is getting to be a long one. I'm going to do a couple more minutes because I have a couple more verses here. And then I'll come back and kind of break this down a little bit more. So Deuteronomy 4:19, it talks again. This is the last part I want to end with, how these are referred to. Deuteronomy 4:19. Behold, beware, do not lift up your eyes to heaven, the Hashaman, and see the sun, the moon, and the stars, all the host of heaven. So what I want to say, when the text is talking about the host of heaven, the host armies of the Lord, his armies. In an army, you have rank, and usually you have a general at the top. You got to get this concept. These are angelic ranks. And be drawn away and worship them and serve them. Those which Adonai your Elohim has allotted to all of the peoples under the whole earth. Listen, if you are serving other guys, and I don't care, maybe you don't go to a statue, you're not really doing pagan rites, but if the things of this world are your Elohim in your mind, if money, if sex, if the things of this world, what you can get and what you can have, you're hoarding things in the physicality, those are your Elohims. That influence, that mazal. See, this is what really irritates me about the New Age movement, because they're repackaging a lot of the concept of mazal or the law of attraction to the lower Elohim. So if you want money, just draw that energy to you, just draw that good vibes. There's no different way of understanding how things operate than just going to a pagan temple and doing all the rites and rituals to gain the mazal, the influence of the gods. All right? So let's just not play the stupid, like only the ancients were doing this stuff. You pagan, or you person who has not submitted yourself to being ruled according to the laws and the dictates, the statutes, the commandments, the ordinances of how Elohim, and getting your blessings there, you're getting your mazal, your blessings from other lesser Elohims. Nothing new under the sun. Nothing new under the sun. Deuteronomy 72 says, 17:2 says, there is found among you, if there is found among you in your towns, that the Elohim is giving you a man or woman who does what is evil in the sight in the sight of Yahweh Elohim, and transgresses his covenant by going and serving other gods and worshiping them, whether the sun, the moon, or any of the hosts of heaven, which I forbid, is exactly what I just said. So if you're worshiping, if you're trying to draw energy or a masal or from anything other than the high Elohim, it's forbidden. And if you're a Christian and you're still doing that, you still got one foot in the world and one foot in it's not going to go well for you. Anyways, they forsook all the second commandment says they forsook all the commandments of the Lord their God and made for themselves molten images, 2 calves, Taurus and Asherah. This is when we get into ancient names, we understand what they're talking about, and worship all the host of heaven and served their Baals, their lords. Jeremiah 19:13, and the houses of Jerusalem and the houses of Judah shall be defiled. All houses upon whose roofs offerings have been made, the whole host of heaven and libations have been poured out to the other Elohims. And in 2 Chronicles 33:3, Manasseh rebuilt the shrines that his father Hezekiah had demolished. He erected altars for the Baals and made sacred posts. He bowed down to all the hosts of heaven and worshiped them. And he built altars to them in the houses of Elohim and the temple. That's pretty serious. And in which the Lord had said, my name will be in Jerusalem in the house of Elohim forever. He built altars for the hosts of heaven in the 2 courts of the house. See, we don't think we're doing these kind of things today. Oh, we're not like them. Well, let me tell you what. Go to the Academy Awards and watch and see how they give thanks to their Elohims who put these in positions. You don't think you get to be. Hasatan said to Yeshua, he tried to look at, I can give you all the kingdoms of the world, if you worship me. That same lie of Hasatan, I can give you anything in this world you want. If you'll do it according to my rules, worship me in my way. There's nothing new under the sun. What people understand is how much they are under the influence of these same Elohims. We just do it a little different. We think we're fancier. Well, it doesn't matter. How Elohim sees through it all. Jeremiah 8:2, it says, and they shall spread before the sun and the moon and all the host of heaven, which they have loved and served, which they have gone after, which they have sought and worshiped, and they will not be gathered or buried. Again, it's always a problem. It's easy to see why Israel is figuratively portrayed as an adulterous woman going after these other lovers. When you understand this principle, people, they're constantly doing this. We have so many other lovers than the high Elohim. Nehemiah 9:6 says that you are the prophet says you are Adonai Elohim, you alone. You have made heaven. You've made the heaven of heavens with all their hosts. You've made the earth and all that is in it, the seas and all that is in them, and you preserve all of them. And the host of heaven worships you. See, there is on the flip side, there is a whole angelic ranks that are in union and do worship with, do worship righteously with the Father in heaven. And that is where we want to come into that congregation and learn that worship with that language. It's all figurative. 2 Chronicles 18:18. Micah says, therefore hear the word of Elohim. I saw Elohim sitting on his throne with all the host of heaven standing on his right and his left. It's all over our Bible. We have got to learn how to read our Bible with the correct lens. We've got to get the correct understanding of what's going on, and we have to be part of the process to put down all rule and authority, everything that has not been, because every tongue is going to confess and every knee is going to bow to the sovereignty of our Yahweh Elohim. Shalom.